I can't move. Please don't hurt me. The girl begged. The biker's kindness touched everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The desert highway stretched across the lonely hills of northern Arizona like a ribbon of fading silver under the late evening sky. The wind carried the dry scent of dust and sagebrush across the empty road while the sun sank slowly behind distant red cliffs. Almost no cars traveled this stretch after sunset, and the silence out there could feel endless. The only sound breaking that quiet evening was the deep thunder of a motorcycle engine rolling steadily along the asphalt. The rider was a large man with broad shoulders wrapped in worn black leather. Years of riding had carved lines into his face, and his gray-streaked beard moved slightly in the rushing wind. His name was Jake Morrison. Around most towns, people stepped aside when they saw him. The heavy boots, the faded tattoos across his arms, the motorcycle club patch stitched across the back of his vest. Those things told a story that many strangers believed without ever speaking to him. But tonight Jake was not looking for trouble. He was simply riding through the long highway miles the way he often did, when the weight of old memories refused to let him sleep. The steady rhythm of the engine usually cleared his mind. Usually the road gave him peace. That peace shattered in a single moment. At first he thought it was the wind, a faint sound drifting across the darkening desert. He eased the throttle slightly and listened again. There it was. A voice. Small, weak, trembling with fear. Jake slowed the motorcycle until the rumble softened into a low growl. The sound came again from somewhere beyond the roadside ditch. I cannot move. Please do not hurt me. The words were fragile and desperate. Jake pulled the motorcycle onto the gravel shoulder and cut the engine. Instantly, the desert returned to silence except for the whisper of wind through dry grass. He swung one heavy leg over the seat and stood still for a moment, scanning the empty road. No other vehicles. No houses. No lights for miles in any direction. The voice came again, softer this time. Please, do not hurt me. Jake moved toward the ditch with careful steps. His boots pressed into loose gravel as he climbed down the shallow slope beside the road. There beneath a twisted guardrail and scattered weeds lay a young girl no older than 8 years. Her dark hair was tangled with dust, and her wide eyes were filled with fear as she stared up at the large stranger standing over her. Her leg was trapped beneath broken metal from a small bicycle that had clearly been struck or thrown aside. The child trembled when she saw the leather vest and the towering figure above her. She tried to move, but pain froze her body. Tears streaked across her dirt-covered cheeks as she whispered again in a shaking voice, I cannot move. Please do not hurt me. Jake Morrison had faced many things in his life. Bar fights, road accidents, even war long ago. But the sight of that terrified child looking at him as if he were the danger made something deep in his chest tighten. For a moment, he simply stood there under the fading desert sky, realizing that this quiet highway ride had just turned into something far more important than the miles behind him. The little girl tried to pull her leg free again, but the movement only made her gasp in pain. The twisted metal of the small bicycle frame pinned her ankle against the dirt and gravel beneath the guardrail. Jake immediately knelt down a few feet away, so he would not appear threatening. Up close he could see how small she really was. Her thin arms trembled as she tried to push herself backward through the weeds, even though she clearly had no strength left to move. The fear in her eyes was not the normal fear of pain. It was the deep, terrified look of a child who believed she was completely alone in the world. Jake raised both of his hands slowly so she could see them clearly in the fading evening light. His voice came out lower and gentler than it had sounded in months. Hey there, little one. I am not going to hurt you. My name is Jake. I heard you calling for help. The girl stared at him for a long moment as if trying to decide whether the giant man in leather was a danger or the only help she had left. Her lips trembled. My bike. I fell. I tried to get up, but my leg would not move. Jake shifted slightly closer, but still kept enough distance so she would not panic. He carefully examined the bent bicycle frame and the guardrail above her. It looked like the bike had slammed into the metal barrier after sliding down the gravel slope from the road. The front wheel was folded sideways and part of the frame had trapped her ankle against a patch of hard dirt. The position explained why she could not stand. The pressure alone would make it impossible for a child to pull free. Jake nodded slowly. All right. I see what happened. You took a bad spill, and the bike pinned your leg. That must hurt a lot. But listen to me. I am going to get you out of there. The girl swallowed hard. Tears gathered in her eyes again, but this time her voice was slightly calmer. My name is Lily. Jake offered a small reassuring smile. Well, Lily, I am glad you told me your name. That is a good start. Now I need you to stay very still for a minute while I move this bike away from your leg. I promise I will be careful. Lily hesitated. Her small fingers clutched a handful of dry grass beside her. You are not mad at me, are you? Jake looked confused for a moment. Mad at you? Why would I be mad at you? Because I was riding on the side of the road. My mom says I should not ride near the highway. Jake shook his head gently. Lily, nobody is mad at you. Accidents happen. What matters right now is getting you safe and making sure you are not hurt too badly. The desert wind brushed softly across the roadside as he reached toward the damaged bicycle. Jake moved slowly so Lily could watch every motion. The metal frame groaned quietly as he lifted the twisted front section away from her ankle. The moment the pressure released, Lily gasped but did not scream. Jake placed the broken bike carefully on the ground beside the ditch and looked back at her leg. Her ankle was scraped and dusty, but it did not appear badly broken. Still, he knew better than to assume anything. Can you wiggle your toes for me, Lily? The girl looked down at her shoe and slowly moved her foot. Jake nodded with relief. That is good. Very good. It means nothing is trapped anymore. But you probably twisted your ankle pretty badly when you fell. Lily tried to sit up again, but the movement made her wince. Jake quickly placed his jacket on the dirt beside her, so she would not have to sit directly on the rough ground. Here, sit up slowly and lean against the guardrail. Take your time. She did as he said with careful movements. When she finally sat upright, she looked at him again with wide, uncertain eyes. Mr. Jake, are you really going to help me? Jake answered without hesitation. Of course I am, Lily. Nobody gets left alone out here. Especially not a kid who needs help on a quiet desert road. The evening sky had turned deep orange across the distant cliffs, and the first cool shadows of night began stretching across the highway. Jake glanced toward the empty road, and then back at the small girl sitting beside the guardrail. Something about the situation felt strange. A child this young should not have been riding alone miles from any house. He crouched down again, so his voice would not carry too much worry. Lily, where are your parents? Do they know you were riding out here tonight? The girl looked down at her hands. For a moment she said nothing. Then her quiet answer drifted into the cooling desert air. I was trying to find help. Lily's quiet answer hung in the cooling desert air like a fragile thread. Jake studied the small girl carefully, sensing that there was much more behind those simple words. The highway above them remained silent, the empty road stretching for miles beneath the fading orange glow of sunset. He lowered himself onto one knee again so that his eyes were level with hers. Trying to find help for what, Lily? The girl wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her dusty shirt. Her hands were still trembling slightly from the fall and from the fear that had gripped her moments earlier. My mom is sick. She said she was fine this morning, but then she could not stand up anymore. She got really pale and told me to stay inside the house, but I got scared. Jake felt a slow tightening in his chest. Where is your house, Lily? She pointed weakly toward the distant desert hills on the opposite side of the highway. There is a dirt road about half a mile that way. Our trailer is back there behind some old cottonwood trees. I rode my bike to the road because I thought maybe a car would pass by and I could ask someone to help my mom. Jake glanced toward the direction she indicated. From the highway, he had barely noticed the faint dirt path leading into the desert. It was the kind of narrow road that many travelers would drive past without ever seeing. And judging from the long, quiet stretch of asphalt around them, it was entirely possible that no one had passed for hours. Lily continued speaking in a small, nervous voice. I waited by the road for a long time, but nobody came. Then when I tried to ride back home, my bike slipped on the gravel, and I crashed into the guardrail. I tried to stand up, but my leg got stuck, and I could not move. Jake listened without interrupting. Every detail painted a clearer picture of the situation. A young child alone on a desert highway trying to find help for a sick parent. The sun was nearly gone now, and the temperature in the open desert would drop quickly after dark. How long has your mom been feeling sick, Lily? The girl looked down at her hands again, as if counting the hours in her mind. Since the afternoon. She tried to drink some water, but then she just lay down on the couch and said she felt dizzy. I got really scared when she stopped answering me. That was when I took my bike and rode to the road. Jake exhaled slowly. His mind shifted into the calm, practical thinking that years of hard experiences had carved into him. If Lily had been waiting out here for help, it meant her mother had been alone in that trailer for hours already. Possibly dehydrated. Possibly suffering from something much worse. And if the child had not fallen off the bicycle, she might still be waiting on the roadside, right now hoping a stranger would appear. Jake glanced once more at the empty highway. The desert wind carried a faint chill as the last light slipped behind the cliffs. He knew exactly how dangerous these lonely roads could become after dark. But at that moment, there was no question about what needed to happen next. He looked back at Lily and spoke with calm reassurance. All right, Lily. Here is what we are going to do. First, I am going to make sure you can stand on that ankle. Then we are going to ride to your house and check on your mom together. The girl blinked in surprise. Ride? You mean on your motorcycle? Jake allowed himself a small smile. Yes, on my motorcycle. It might look a little big, but it will get us to your house much faster than walking through the desert. Lily studied the large black motorcycle parked on the shoulder above them. The machine seemed enormous compared to her small bicycle. But after a moment she nodded slowly. If it will help my mom, then I want to go. Jake gently helped her test her weight on the injured ankle. She winced, but managed to stand with his support. Good, he said softly. That means we can move. He helped her climb carefully up the slope toward the road where the motorcycle waited beneath the darkening sky. Neither of them noticed the distant cloud of dust beginning to rise along the far end of the highway as another vehicle slowly approached from miles away. The engine of the motorcycle rumbled softly as Jake steadied the heavy machine on the gravel shoulder of the highway. The desert evening had grown cooler, and the last streaks of sunlight were fading behind the red cliffs in the distance. Jake helped Lily climb carefully onto the seat in front of him so that he could keep one arm around her while riding. The motorcycle looked enormous compared to her small frame, and she hesitated for a moment as she settled onto the seat. Her injured ankle still ached, and the long day had clearly drained her energy. Jake noticed the hesitation and spoke in a calm, steady voice. Do not worry, Lily. I will ride slowly. Just hold on to the handlebars and lean against me if you need to. She nodded quietly and gripped the metal bars with both hands. The smell of warm engine oil and desert dust drifted through the air as Jake started the motorcycle again. The deep roar of the engine broke the silence of the empty highway and echoed across the wide, open desert. For a moment Lily flinched at the sudden sound, but then she relaxed slightly when Jake placed one steady hand across her shoulder to keep her balanced. Ready? He asked. Lily nodded again. Jake eased the motorcycle forward and guided it slowly along the edge of the road until they reached the narrow dirt path Lily had pointed to earlier. The path was barely visible from the highway. Two faint tracks cut through the dry desert soil and disappeared toward the dark silhouettes of cottonwood trees nearly half a mile away. Jake turned the motorcycle carefully onto the dirt road and reduced the speed so the ride would stay smooth for the small passenger sitting in front of him. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as they moved deeper into the quiet desert landscape. Lily looked forward into the growing shadows and spoke softly over the rumble of the engine. Our trailer is past those trees. It is old, but my mom says it is still home. Jake listened without speaking. The faint outline of the cottonwood trees grew closer as the motorcycle followed the uneven path. The sky above them had turned deep blue and the first stars were beginning to appear. The desert always changed quickly after sunset, and the cool night air now brushed against their faces. Jake kept the speed low to avoid jarring Lily's injured ankle. As they rode, he asked a quiet question. Lily, how long have you and your mom lived out here? She thought for a moment before answering. Almost a year. We moved here after my mom lost her job in town. She said it was cheaper to live in the trailer until things got better. Jake nodded slowly, even though she could not see the gesture from where she sat. He had seen stories like that before. People trying to rebuild their lives in places far from busy towns where rent and noise and trouble could not follow them so easily. But living far from others also meant help was far away. When something went wrong, the cottonwood trees now stood only a short distance ahead, and Jake could see the faint outline of a small weathered trailer sitting behind them. One weak porch light flickered beside the door, casting a pale circle across the dusty ground. Lily suddenly leaned forward and pointed. "That is our place." Jake guided the motorcycle closer and brought it to a slow stop beside the narrow steps leading to the trailer door. The engine fell silent, and the night returned to quiet once more. For a moment, neither of them moved. Lily stared at the trailer with worry written across her face. Jake gently helped her slide down from the motorcycle and steady herself on the ground. The porch light buzzed faintly above them, and the dry desert wind stirred the leaves of the cottonwood trees. Jake studied the trailer carefully. No sound came from inside. No movement. The stillness felt heavy in the quiet night air. Lily looked up at him with anxious eyes. "Mr. Jake, what if my mom is still sick?" Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we are going to help her, Lily. That is why we came." He stepped toward the trailer door and knocked firmly against the weathered wood. The sound echoed softly through the silent desert, but no answer came from inside. The quiet desert night pressed in around the small trailer as Jake stood on the narrow wooden porch beside Lily. The faint buzzing of the porch light was the only sound for a moment after his knock faded into the darkness. Lily held her breath and stared at the closed door as if she expected it to open at any second. But nothing happened. Jake knocked again, a little louder this time. The weathered wood rattled softly beneath his knuckles. Still there was no response from inside. Lily's voice trembled beside him. "Mom usually answers when I knock. She never sleeps this early." Jake glanced down at the girl and saw the fear returning to her eyes. He placed a steady hand on the doorknob and tried turning it gently. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly. The hinges creaked as the door swung inward, and a dim yellow light from a small lamp illuminated the cramped interior of the trailer. The air inside felt warm and still. Lily immediately stepped past him despite the soreness in her ankle. "Mom," she called softly. The tiny living space held a worn couch against one wall and a small kitchen table beside the window. A stack of folded laundry sat on one chair, and a half-empty glass of water rested on the table. Everything looked ordinary except for the figure lying on the couch. Lily rushed forward as quickly as her injured ankle allowed. "Mom, I brought help." Her mother lay stretched across the couch with one arm hanging weakly over the side. She was a thin woman with pale skin and tired eyes that barely opened when Lily touched her shoulder. Her breathing was slow and shallow. Jake moved closer and immediately recognized the signs of someone who had been ill for hours without proper care. The woman tried to focus her eyes on the large man standing in the doorway. Her voice came out weak and confused. "Lily, who is that?" Lily squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, this is Jake. He found me on the road when my bike crashed. He brought me home so we could help you." The woman tried to sit up, but her strength failed, and she sank back into the couch cushions. Jake stepped forward quickly. "Do not try to move yet, ma'am. You look like you have been very sick." He reached for the glass of water on the table and gently helped her lift her head so she could take a small sip. The woman swallowed slowly before closing her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered faintly. "I must have fainted earlier. I remember feeling dizzy and then everything went dark." Lily looked between them anxiously. "Mom, you scared me. You would not answer me, so I rode my bike to the road to find help." Her mother's tired eyes widened slightly. "You rode all the way to the highway by yourself?" Lily nodded quietly. Jake stepped back for a moment and studied the room. The trailer was small but clean, and the kitchen counter held a few unopened cans of soup and a nearly empty jug of water. The signs pointed to exhaustion and dehydration more than anything else, but he knew it would be wise to bring proper medical help. He turned back toward the couch and spoke gently but firmly. "Ma'am, I think you need a doctor to look at you. You may be severely dehydrated or suffering from something more serious. The nearest town hospital cannot be more than a few miles from here." The woman tried to protest, but her voice faded again. "I do not have a car, and the ambulance service out here is expensive." Jake shook his head calmly. "Do not worry about that right now. What matters is getting you the care you need." Lily stood beside the couch, gripping her mother's hand tightly. For the first time since the crash on the highway, her small face showed a hint of relief. The quiet trailer that had felt so frightening only hours earlier now held a stranger who had arrived exactly when they needed help most. Outside, the desert wind stirred the cottonwood trees, while Jake Morrison reached into his pocket for his phone, preparing to call for assistance. The dim light inside the trailer cast long shadows across the small room as Jake Morrison pulled his phone from the inside pocket of his worn leather vest. The screen lit up his weathered face while Lily remained beside the couch holding her mother's hand tightly, as if she feared letting go might cause her to disappear again. Outside, the cottonwood trees whispered softly in the night wind, and the quiet desert stretched for miles beyond the narrow dirt road. Jake glanced down at the phone screen and felt a familiar frustration tighten his jaw. The signal indicator showed only a faint single bar struggling to hold a connection. He stepped closer to the small window beside the kitchen table and lifted the phone higher, as if the movement alone might pull a stronger signal from the empty sky. Lily watched him with worried eyes. "Is it working, Mr. Jake?" He gave a small thoughtful nod, though he was not entirely certain yet. "I am trying, Lily. Out here in the desert the phone signal can be weak, but we will find a way." He dialed the emergency number and waited as the phone attempted to connect. For several long seconds, there was only silence followed by the faint echo of a ringing tone. Then suddenly the call dropped. Jake lowered the phone slowly and exhaled through his nose. The weak signal had failed again. Lily's shoulders slumped slightly. "Does that mean no one can come help my mom?" Jake shook his head firmly. "No, Lily. It just means we need to be a little smarter about it." He stepped outside onto the narrow porch again, where the open sky stretched above the cottonwood trees. The signal bars flickered uncertainly as he raised the phone higher. Finally, the device caught a stronger connection. Without wasting another second, Jake dialed again. This time the call connected, and a calm voice answered from the emergency dispatcher many miles away. Jake spoke clearly and explained the situation. A woman alone in a remote trailer suffering from severe weakness and possible dehydration. A child injured in a bicycle accident earlier that evening. The dispatcher listened carefully and promised to send an ambulance from the nearest town as quickly as possible. When Jake ended the call, he returned inside the trailer and placed the phone back into his vest pocket. Lily looked up immediately, searching his face for an answer. "They are coming," he said gently. "It may take a little time because the hospital is several miles away, but help is on the way." Lily released a slow breath of relief and squeezed her mother's hand again. Her mother had drifted into a shallow, restless sleep, but her breathing seemed slightly steadier now that she had water. Jake moved to the small kitchen counter and began looking through the cabinets. He found a clean cloth and soaked it with cool water from the sink before returning to the couch. He carefully placed the damp cloth across the woman's forehead to help bring down her rising temperature. Years ago, he had learned small emergency care techniques during difficult times in his life, and those memories now guided his hands with calm precision. Lily watched every movement quietly. After a moment, she spoke in a soft voice. "Mr. Jake, why did you stop when you heard me on the road?" Jake paused for a second before answering. "Not everyone would have heard me," he said. Jake looked at the young girl sitting beside the couch, and his expression softened slightly. "Sometimes when someone calls for help, you just know you have to listen." The room fell silent again, except for the faint ticking of an old wall clock near the kitchen doorway. Outside, the desert night grew deeper, and the stars spread across the sky like scattered silver dust. In the distance far beyond the cottonwood trees, a faint set of headlights appeared on the highway, slowly moving toward the dirt road that led to the small trailer. The faint glow of headlights slowly grew brighter across the distant stretch of highway beyond the cottonwood trees. Inside the trailer, the quiet ticking of the old wall clock filled the room, while Lily remained seated beside her mother, gently holding the weak woman's hand. Jake noticed the movement of light through the small window and stepped toward the door to look outside. The cool desert air brushed against his face as he opened the door and scanned the horizon. Two bright beams of light moved slowly along the highway before turning toward the narrow dirt road that led to the trailer. For a moment, Jake wondered if it might already be the ambulance sent by the dispatcher, but the sound of the approaching engine told a different story. The vehicle was moving too slowly, and the rumble sounded heavier than an ambulance engine. Jake stood quietly on the porch and watched as the headlights drew closer through the drifting dust along the dirt road. After a minute, the shape of a large pickup truck appeared beneath the cottonwood trees. The truck rolled to a stop a short distance from the trailer, and the engine shut off. The desert fell silent again, except for the whisper of wind through dry leaves. A door opened, and an older man stepped down from the truck. His gray hair caught the porch light as he looked toward the trailer with a puzzled expression. Jake relaxed slightly and raised one hand in greeting. "Evening," he called calmly. The man walked closer until the porch light revealed his weathered face and thick denim jacket. His eyes moved from Jake to the motorcycle parked beside the trailer and then toward the open doorway. "Everything all right out here?" he asked. Lily heard the voice and hurried toward the door as quickly as her sore ankle allowed. "Mr. Henderson," she said with sudden relief. The older man's face softened when he saw her. "Lily, what happened?" "Your mother was supposed to bring you by my place tomorrow for groceries." Lily pointed toward the couch inside the trailer. "Mom got really sick and would not wake up. I tried to find help on the highway, and then I crashed my bike. Jake helped me get home." Mr. Henderson stepped inside the trailer quickly and moved toward the couch. He knelt beside the woman and gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes opened slowly as she recognized him. "Frank," she murmured weakly. The older man nodded reassuringly. "Easy now, Sarah. Looks like you gave everyone quite a scare tonight." Jake stepped into the room behind him and explained the situation in a calm voice. "She appears severely dehydrated and possibly fainted earlier this afternoon. I contacted emergency services, and an ambulance is already on the way from the nearest town." Mr. Henderson looked up at him with gratitude. "You did the right thing, son. Out here, help does not come quickly unless someone steps in." Lily remained beside the couch, watching both men carefully. Her small shoulders finally relaxed for the first time since the long, frightening afternoon. Jake leaned quietly against the kitchen counter while Mr. Henderson brought another glass of water and helped Sarah take a few careful sips. The presence of the older neighbor seemed to comfort her as much as the water itself. Outside, the night had grown darker, and the distant highway lights flickered across the desert hills. Then faintly at first, but growing louder with every passing moment, a new sound reached the trailer through the quiet air. The unmistakable wail of a distant ambulance siren carried across the desert night, slowly moving closer along the empty highway. The distant wail of the ambulance siren slowly grew louder across the quiet desert night, echoing faintly against the rocky hills far beyond the highway. Inside the small trailer, the sound brought a visible wave of relief to Lily's face. She looked toward the door, as if the approaching help might appear at any moment. Mr. Henderson stood beside the couch holding the glass of water, while Sarah rested weakly against the worn cushions. Her breathing had grown steadier, but her face was still pale under the soft yellow light of the small lamp beside the wall. Jake remained near the kitchen counter watching the room calmly, his attention shifting between the weak woman on the couch and the small girl standing beside her. Lily's voice broke the silence again. "That is the ambulance, right? They are really coming." Jake gave a reassuring nod. "Yes, Lily. They are getting closer. The nearest hospital is several miles away, but those sirens mean they found the dirt road." Mr. Henderson walked toward the door and stepped out onto the porch to watch the road through the cottonwood trees. The red and white flashes of the ambulance lights were already beginning to flicker across the dark desert ground as the vehicle approached. Dust lifted into the air behind it while the engine worked its way along the narrow path. Within a minute, the ambulance rolled to a stop beside the trailer. Two paramedics stepped out quickly carrying medical bags and a small stretcher. One of them approached the porch while the other moved toward the rear doors of the ambulance to prepare the equipment. "Evening," the first paramedic said in a steady professional voice. "We received a call about a woman feeling faint and dehydrated." Jake stepped forward and nodded toward the couch inside the trailer. "That is correct. She lost consciousness earlier and has been extremely weak since the afternoon. She has taken a little water but has not been able to stand." The paramedic listened carefully and then walked inside to examine Sarah. Lily stepped back slightly while the medical team checked her mother's pulse and asked a few quiet questions. Sarah answered slowly but clearly as the paramedic checked her temperature and blood pressure. After a moment, the paramedic turned to the others. "Her vital signs are stable, but she is severely dehydrated and exhausted. We should take her to the hospital for fluids and observation tonight." Lily looked worried again when she heard the words hospital. She stepped closer to the couch. "Mom, will you be okay?" Sarah reached out weakly and brushed Lily's hair with her fingers. "I will be fine, sweetheart. The doctors just need to help me get my strength back." The second paramedic brought the stretcher inside, and together they carefully helped Sarah sit upright. Jake moved quietly to Lily's side when he saw the girl struggling to stay calm. "It is going to be all right," he said softly. "They know exactly what to do." Lily nodded but continued watching every movement as the paramedics lifted her mother gently onto the stretcher. The small trailer suddenly felt much more crowded as the team prepared to carry Sarah outside to the waiting ambulance. Mr. Henderson stepped aside near the door while Jake helped hold it open so the stretcher could pass through safely. The cool desert air rushed inside as they carried Sarah toward the ambulance lights. Lily followed closely behind them until the paramedic turned back and spoke kindly to her. "You can ride with us to the hospital if you want." Lily hesitated for a moment and then looked up at Jake as if asking what she should do next. Jake gave her a calm, encouraging nod. "Go with your mom. I will make sure everything else here is taken care of." Lily held her mother's hand as the paramedics guided them both into the ambulance under the flashing lights. The doors closed gently and the engine started again. As the ambulance turned slowly back toward the highway, the red lights reflected across the quiet desert road, while Jake Morrison stood beneath the cottonwood trees, watching until the vehicle disappeared into the dark night. The red glow of the ambulance lights slowly faded into the distance as the vehicle disappeared along the narrow dirt road and turned back toward the empty highway. The desert night quickly returned to its quiet rhythm. The wind moved gently through the cottonwood trees, and the distant sound of the sirens softened until it became nothing more than a faint echo across the dark hills. Jake Morrison stood beside his motorcycle with his arms resting loosely at his sides, watching the road for a few more seconds even after the ambulance had vanished. Mr. Henderson stepped down from the porch and joined him near the edge of the dusty yard. For a moment, neither man spoke. They simply listened to the quiet desert around them. Finally, Mr. Henderson let out a slow breath and shook his head slightly. "That little girl sure has more courage than most grown folks I know. Riding all the way to the highway alone just to get help for her mother." Jake nodded once. "She was scared, but she did what she thought was right." Mr. Henderson glanced toward the empty trailer behind them, where the porch light still flickered faintly. "Sarah has been having a hard year. Losing her job in town nearly broke her spirit. She moved out here hoping to start over, but living this far from people makes things difficult when trouble shows up." Jake looked across the quiet desert where the ambulance had disappeared. "Out here you do not get many second chances unless someone happens to pass by." Mr. Henderson studied the large motorcycle parked beside Jake. Then he looked back at the tall rider with a thoughtful expression. "Well, tonight you were that someone. If you had not stopped when Lily called for help, things could have turned out very differently." Jake did not answer right away. He simply glanced toward the road again, as if thinking about the moment he first heard the frightened voice in the ditch beside the highway. After a moment, he spoke quietly. "Sometimes the road puts something in front of you for a reason." Mr. Henderson gave a small nod and rubbed the back of his neck. "The hospital in Cedar Ridge is about 12 miles from here. It is a small place, but the doctors there are good people. Sarah will be in safe hands tonight." Jake leaned lightly against the seat of his motorcycle while the cool night air settled across the desert. The stars above them had grown brighter, and the wide sky stretched endlessly over the quiet land. After a moment, Mr. Henderson spoke again. "What about the girl? Her ankle looked pretty sore when she walked inside earlier." Jake shrugged slightly. "The paramedics noticed it before they left. They said they would take a look at it when they reached the hospital. Probably just a bad twist from the crash." Mr. Henderson gave a short laugh filled with relief. "That child has already been through enough excitement for one day." Jake looked down at the dusty ground beneath his boots. The night had grown calm again, but his mind still replayed the events of the evening. The frightened voice in the ditch. The crashed twisted bicycle. The small girl trying to be brave even while she believed she was alone. Mr. Henderson placed his hands on his hips and looked toward the highway. "You heading back to town tonight, son?" Jake glanced toward the distant road and then at the faint glow of the trailer porch light. "Not just yet," he said. "I want to make sure the place is secure for when they come home." Mr. Henderson smiled at that answer. "Well, I live about a mile down the road. If you need anything, you can find me there." Jake gave a quiet nod. "Thank you." The older man walked back toward his pickup truck and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine started with a low rumble before the headlights turned slowly toward the dirt road leading away from the trailer. Jake remained standing beside his motorcycle under the wide desert sky, watching the quiet trailer that now sat empty beneath the cottonwood trees. The quiet desert night stretched across the empty land after Mr. Henderson drove away. The faint rumble of his truck slowly faded along the dirt road until the only sound left was the soft whisper of wind through the cottonwood trees. Jake Morrison remained beside his motorcycle for a long moment, his eyes resting on the small trailer that now stood silent under the dim porch light. The evening had changed more than he expected when he first started that ride across the highway. What began as another long, lonely road had suddenly turned into something far more meaningful. Jake walked slowly toward the porch and stepped inside the trailer to make sure everything was secure before leaving. The small room still held the warmth of the earlier moments when Lily had been sitting beside her mother. The glass of water remained on the table. The damp cloth Jake had placed on Sarah's forehead lay folded beside the couch. Everything looked exactly as they had left it, except now the trailer felt quiet and empty. Jake moved through the room with calm, careful steps, checking the windows and making sure the door locks worked properly. He knew that when Sarah and Lily returned from the hospital, they would need to come home to a place that felt safe and ready. When he finished, he stepped outside again and closed the trailer door behind him. The desert sky above had grown darker, and the stars now filled the wide horizon from one end to the other. Jake leaned against the seat of his motorcycle and looked out across the silent land. For a moment he thought about leaving. The highway was waiting only a few minutes away, and the road always welcomed riders who preferred distance over conversation. But something about the night made him pause. He pulled his phone from his vest pocket and checked the time before placing it back again. The hospital in Cedar Ridge would take at least 20 minutes to reach from this dirt road, and the paramedics would need time to examine Sarah properly. Jake knew that Lily would likely be worried even if she tried to act brave in front of the doctors. The thought made him sigh quietly. He looked once more at the small trailer and then at the long road that stretched toward the highway. Finally, he made a simple decision. Jake swung one leg over the motorcycle seat and started the engine. The deep rumble of the machine broke the stillness of the desert night once more. Instead of turning toward the highway, he guided the motorcycle slowly back down the dirt road in the same direction the ambulance had traveled earlier. Gravel crunched beneath the tires while the headlight cut a narrow path through the darkness ahead. The cool night air rushed past him as the motorcycle gained speed. After a few minutes, the dirt road joined the empty highway once again. Jake turned the motorcycle toward Cedar Ridge and continued riding through the quiet miles. The road ahead curved gently through the desert hills, and the distant lights of the small town finally appeared along the horizon. Those lights marked the place where Sarah and Lily had been taken. Jake rode steadily toward them under the wide starlit sky. For the first time in a long while, the road was not carrying him away from people. It was leading him directly toward them. The lights of Cedar Ridge shimmered softly against the dark desert horizon as Jake Morrison rode into the quiet town. The motorcycle engine echoed through the nearly empty streets while most homes and businesses had already settled into the calm of the late evening. Cedar Ridge was the kind of small town where the hospital stood only a few blocks from the main road, its bright white lights visible long before Jake turned into the parking lot. The motorcycle rolled slowly between rows of parked vehicles before Jake brought it to a stop near the emergency entrance. The engine fell silent, and the night air wrapped around him again. For a moment, he simply sat there watching the doors of the hospital, remembering the frightened voice he had heard beside the highway only a short time earlier. Then he stepped off the motorcycle and walked toward the entrance. Inside the hospital, the air felt warm and clean with the quiet hum of machines and distant voices moving through the hallways. A nurse sitting behind the reception desk looked up when Jake entered. Her eyes paused briefly on the tall man with the leather vest and road-worn boots, but her voice remained calm and professional. "Can I help you, sir?" Jake nodded politely. Earlier tonight, an ambulance brought in a woman named Sarah and her daughter Lily. They came from the desert outside town. I wanted to check if they are doing all right. The nurse typed quickly on the computer beside her and then looked up again. Yes, they arrived not long ago. The mother is being treated for severe dehydration, but she is stable. The daughter has a mild ankle sprain from a bicycle accident, but she is also doing fine. Jake felt a small weight lift from his chest when he heard the words stable and fine. That is good to hear, he replied quietly. The nurse studied him for a moment before speaking again. The little girl has been asking about the man who helped them. Would you like to see them? Jake hesitated for a brief second. Hospitals were not places he often visited, and the bright, clean hallways felt very different from the long, empty highways he was used to riding. But the thought of Lily waiting and wondering if the stranger who helped her had simply disappeared again made him nod. The nurse stood and guided him down the hallway toward a small patient room. The door stood slightly open, and the soft light from inside revealed Lily sitting in a chair beside the hospital bed. Her ankle was wrapped with a light bandage, and she looked up the moment she heard footsteps in the hallway. When her eyes landed on Jake, her entire face brightened with relief. "Mr. Jake," she called happily. "I knew you would come." Jake stepped into the room and gave a small smile. "I just wanted to make sure you and your mom were all right." Sarah rested against the hospital pillows with an intravenous line connected to her arm. Her color had improved, and she gave Jake a grateful look. "The doctors say I should feel much better after some fluids and rest," she said softly. Lily reached out and gently took Jake's hand, as if she had known him for years instead of only a few hours. "I told everyone you were the one who saved us tonight." Jake shook his head slightly, but there was a quiet warmth in his voice when he answered. "You were the brave one. Lily, you rode all the way to the highway to find help. That is what saved your mom." The small hospital room felt peaceful in that moment, while the long, frightening day finally began to settle into something calm and hopeful. The small hospital room remained quiet except for the steady rhythm of the medical monitor and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above. Lily still held Jake's hand, as if letting go might cause the moment to disappear. For the first time since the frightening events of the afternoon, her shoulders looked relaxed, and her eyes no longer carried the same fear that had filled them beside the highway. Sarah rested against the pillows, watching the scene with quiet emotion. A few hours earlier, she had been lying helpless in a lonely trailer, believing she might not wake again. Now she was safe inside a hospital room with her daughter beside her, and the stranger who had appeared on the desert road standing near the bed. Sarah spoke gently. "Jake, I do not know how to thank you for what you did tonight. If you had not stopped when Lily needed help, we might not be here right now." Jake shifted slightly and rubbed the back of his neck in a way that showed he was not used to hearing praise. "You do not have to thank me, ma'am. Anyone who heard a child asking for help would have done the same thing." Lily shook her head quickly. "Not everyone would have stopped. There were cars earlier in the day, but they drove past before I could wave them down." Jake looked at her with quiet understanding. "Sometimes people are moving too fast to notice what is happening around them. That does not mean they do not care. It just means they do not always see." Sarah studied him for a moment and then asked softly, "What made you see?" Jake did not answer immediately. His eyes moved briefly toward the window where the town lights glowed faintly outside. After a few seconds, he spoke in a calm voice. "I have spent many years riding long roads by myself. When you spend enough time alone, you start listening more carefully to the world around you. When I heard Lily's voice, it did not feel like something I could ignore." Lily smiled up at him. "I am glad you listened." A nurse entered the room quietly and checked the medical monitor beside Sarah's bed. "Everything looks much better," she said kindly. "The fluids are helping, and the doctor expects you will be able to go home tomorrow afternoon." Lily clapped her hands softly in excitement before remembering where she was and lowering her voice again. "That means we can go back to our trailer." The nurse nodded. "Yes, but the doctor will want you to rest for a few days and drink plenty of water." Sarah smiled weakly but gratefully. "I will follow those instructions very carefully." When the nurse left the room, Lily turned back toward Jake with bright, curious eyes. "Are you going to ride away again tonight?" Jake leaned against the chair beside the bed and considered the question. "I will probably head back to the road soon," he answered honestly. "That is where my motorcycle usually takes me." Lily looked thoughtful for a moment and then reached into the pocket of her small jacket that had been folded on the chair beside her. She pulled out a tiny, smooth stone with faint red stripes running through it. "I found this rock near the cottonwood trees behind our trailer last spring," she said. "It is my lucky stone. I want you to have it, so the road keeps bringing you to people who need help." Jake looked at the small stone resting in her palm. For a moment he seemed unsure how to respond, but then he accepted it carefully and closed his fingers around it. "Thank you, Lily. I will keep it with me." The hospital room slowly settled into a peaceful quiet after Lily placed the small striped stone into Jake Morrison's hand. The little rock felt smooth and warm from her fingers, and Jake studied it for a moment before slipping it carefully into the pocket of his leather vest. Lily watched him with a proud smile as if she had just given away something very important. Sarah rested comfortably against the pillows, and the color had returned to her face thanks to the fluids slowly moving through the intravenous line beside the bed. The long, frightening day that had begun in the lonely desert now felt like a distant storm that had finally passed. Jake stood beside the chair for a few more minutes, speaking quietly with both of them. The nurse returned once more to check the equipment and confirmed again that Sarah's condition had improved greatly. She would remain in the hospital overnight for observation, but the doctor expected a full recovery by the following afternoon. Lily seemed relieved every time someone repeated that news. Eventually, the late hour began to catch up with the small girl, and she yawned while leaning against the chair beside the bed. Sarah brushed her daughter's hair gently and whispered that she should rest for a while. Jake noticed the tired look on Lily's face and stepped toward the door. "I should let you both get some sleep," he said softly. Lily looked up quickly. "Are you leaving now?" Jake nodded, but there was a gentle kindness in his voice. "The road is waiting, but I wanted to see you safe first." Lily slid carefully from the chair and walked over to him with her bandaged ankle moving slowly but steadily. She gave him a small hug that caught him by surprise. "Thank you for stopping on the road, Mr. Jake," she said quietly. Jake rested one hand lightly on her shoulder. "You were very brave today, Lily. Do not forget that." Sarah looked at him with deep gratitude in her eyes. "I hope someday we can repay the kindness you showed us tonight." Jake shook his head gently. "Just take care of each other. That is more than enough." With that, he stepped out of the room and walked down the quiet hallway toward the hospital entrance. Outside, the cool desert night welcomed him again. The motorcycle waited exactly where he had parked it under the pale glow of a streetlight. Jake climbed onto the seat and started the engine. The deep, familiar rumble filled the quiet parking lot before he slowly guided the motorcycle toward the road leading out of Cedar Ridge. As he rode past the hospital building, he glanced once toward the lit windows where Sarah and Lily rested safely inside. Then he turned onto the long highway stretching across the desert hills. The stars shone brightly above the empty road, and the cool night air rushed past him as the motorcycle carried him forward. Miles away, the small trailer still stood beneath the cottonwood trees waiting for the family to return home. And somewhere inside Jake's vest pocket, the small striped stone moved gently with the rhythm of the ride. It would remain there as a quiet reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin the moment a rider chooses to stop and listen when someone calls for help.